Thank you so much. Louis is just one of the many wonderful people we've gotten to meet as a result of our efforts to bring museums in the web to Asia. My name is Nancy Proctor. I'm co-chair with Rich Cherry of Museums in the Web. And I'd just like to take a moment to speak a little bit about our goals and our mission for Museums in the Web in Asia this year and ongoing. So as Rich mentioned, we've been running conferences in North America for 17 years. And Museums in the Web now is the largest international conference on technology in the cultural sector in the world. And we've always had representatives from organizations from Asia and elsewhere representing both their projects, their products and offerings, and their learnings. But we've become aware that there's much more important work going on in Asia, both in the cultural sector and in terms of technology, than we've been able to engage with from afar. So when we were invited last year to run a one-day event at City University, Hong Kong, as part of the NODIM conference, it seemed like an excellent opportunity to start to bridge that distance and to expand Museum in the Web's conversation to a larger number of Asian colleagues and institutions. And on the basis of the success of that meeting, we collaborated with colleagues here in Hong Kong to return this year. It's never hard to convince me to come back to Hong Kong, Louis. And we're also very excited to get to visit Beijing just afterwards at the invitation of the Central Academy of Fine Arts, or CAFA. So MW Asia is a very new meeting with old and international roots, but in order to grow and thrive, it's got to become a conversation and a network driven by professionals like you. So our aim is not to export Museums in the Web to the East, but rather to open up a dialogue and to create possibilities for more face-to-face encounters among cultural professionals from around the world. Because even as we digital technology specialists know, there's some things that the internet just can't do. You know, encounters and conversations that are really only going to happen in person, in the live debates of a conference session, in a hotel bar, or in performances like the one that Adriel Lewis is going to be doing this evening. And I hope my quick examples here inspire you to fill in his question cards about art and technology to be used as part of that performance this evening. So really, this is an invitation to you all and to your colleagues and those you know who couldn't be here to join this dialogue and help us develop a network of the world's leading cultural heritage and technology professionals. And it's in that spirit that we invited this panel of experts to open MW Asia with a lively discussion of their insights and their observations about the changing presentation and representation of East and West by museums online. Our presenters have worked both in and with museums and cultural collections in Asia and abroad. They'll share with you today precisely the kind of liminal experiences and expertise that form what's been discussed in the literature as border habitats, these environments that are rich in their diversity and offer new, transformative kinds of innovations. And I think this is the most appropriate place in the world, really, Hong Kong, this also liminal space between East and West, between China and the rest of the world, between ancient and modern, between past and future, is the perfect place, really, to open that dialogue. So without further elaboration of my theoretical reasons for being here, I would like to introduce the chair of this session, Susan Chung. She is a researcher and consultant to cultural heritage organizations, and she is Museums in the Web's publisher. Her work focuses on publishing, information management and collections aggregation, cultural data, intellectual property policy, and open content initiatives, visualization and advanced search strategies, or what I like to sum up in shorthand as all the hard stuff. She currently serves as program director for Project Audience, which is an interdisciplinary collaboration of arts and cultural organizations founded by the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation, and as principal investigator for Project Audience's research into the uses of cultural event data. Susan's background in publishing includes work as an editor and publications manager at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, Alfred A. Knopf, the Asia Society, and 15 years at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So thank you very much, Susan.
So hi there. It's really great to be here and to see so many old friends and so many new ones. We are looking forward to a sort of lively hour-long conversation. This panel, Nancy and Rich, as well as the four of us, thought that the occasion of this gathering in Hong Kong would be a really good opportunity for a bit of reflection in this community about a couple of big issues that we don't often address. Sorry. We are asking the community, we're using this, this discussion, which will be loosely structured and somewhat casual, as a provocation, an opportunity to ask you to reflect on the ways in which we talk about others on the web and in museum exhibitions. And we are framing the conversation, for the most part, by asking you to think about the ways in which the great moments in the history of the web, now 15 years old or so, have actually changed the way that we practice the presentation of other cultures as museum professionals. So I am going to ask my colleagues on the panel to introduce themselves, and then we will go at this. As I say, we're talking about the key moments in the history of the web, and this was our timeline. Yours might be different, and as I say, our examples, our ideas will be our own. They'll come from our own professional practice space. But we hope you'll jump in and and add your own ideas. This room is set up as a classroom, and I hate that, but I really hope that you'll all feel free to be rowdy and challenge us, and be a part of this conversation. So anyway, we'll actually hit all of these points as we go, but we have a couple of diversions first. And very first, introductions. So I'll be serving as this discussion's ringmaster. I have a few things to say as well, but for the most part, I'll be trying to keep the animals in order. Our three participants who represent very, very different points of view, East and West, formal and high culture. Daisy and I come from traditional museum backgrounds, and Adriel and Ilya are much more part of the underground, despite their sort of sparkling credentials. We really hope that this gives you a good idea of the sort of landscape of culture online right now. So you guys are going to introduce yourselves, right? And then we'll go.
Hi. My name is Ilya, and I'm in the past 10 years I've been working in Taiwan, and we have done a national big project called AdLib, the Taiwan's e-learning and digital archive program. And in the 10 years we've been collaborating with cultural institutions in the whole island, and we produce a lot of databases and union catalog. And so that's the field work in collaborating with cultural institutions as a GIP and also as a technology people. And also I'm running a global local community network organization called Culture Mundo since 2005. It's an excellent experience to connect with a lot of friends here, and also the digital culture community worldwide.
Actually, do we have any members of Culture Mundo in the room? No? You all have to take a look.
Yes, and right now I'm a special assistant to Dr. De Cai Li, the president of NCHU.edu.tw. He's my boss for the past 6 years, leading the digital archive program in Taiwan, and now we are doing that to try to spread out the expertise and the experiences.
Daisy.
Do I have the slides too?
You do have slides.
Oh, wonderful. Good morning. My name is Daisy Yiyo Wang, or Wang Yiyo. I'm the curator of Chinese and East Asian art at the Peabody Essex Museum in Salem, Massachusetts. And I'm very honored and incredibly honored to be here to share with you my observations, and also, most important of all, to learn from all of you. As you can see, to bring diversity and bring actual pad. But also, I want to basically use 2 slides to sort of share with you my encounters with technology. And as Susan mentioned, I came from more or less traditional museums. I worked at the Smithsonian's National Museum of Asian Art in Washington, D.C., which is called the Free and Sackler Galleries. And last year, actually a year ago, I worked with contemporary Chinese artist Cai Guoqiang to do an explosion on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. So what you are seeing in the slide is about 3,000 people lined up, including a lot of important people, such as the secretary of the Smithsonian. They are very eager to see what this artist can blow up. So he ignited 2,000 smoke bursts to create a cascade of smoke to evoke the Chinese image of ink painting of a tree. But what really freaked me out, I was the co-curator of the exhibition, is that my colleague in the web department asked me, Daisy, actually, can we do online live streaming? I said, no, because we just got permit from the National Park Service 2 days ago. We should make sure, we're not gonna, have cords across the street, because we actually closed several streets for that event. You can imagine that kind of critical moment, but my colleague convinced me, said, we absolutely have to do this. So this performance lasts only for a few seconds, but then online, we have 70,000 people actually watching the online live streaming. So I think that's a very powerful moment for me as a person who is trained in traditional art to understand the power of the online. Next slides, please. Oh, thank you very much. And also, some of you may notice that in the 1970s, when US and China were not good friends, actually the Chinese government organized a very important exhibition of archaeological materials from China, and that's sort of a very important cultural diplomacy tool. And the next slide is what is happening today is the Hunan Provincial Museum, which is in my hometown. They worked with the Google Art Project and actually become the first mainland museum to put the stuff on the Google platform. So you can really see that how web actually transformed the way how we work together. Thanks.
Okay. Adriel? Actually, I want to say something. Just because Adriel is going to introduce himself, and then he's gonna talk a little about some ideas that we feel frame the discussion, and after that we will go into our conversation as a group about the history of the web and the ways in which some examples that we want to share describe the evolution of our practice. Adriel plays a really important role in this conversation. He reminds us that most of the changes that the internet brings to us come first to the world around us and to artists before museums. And so I think that his voice is an important one in this discussion, and we're really psyched to have him. Also, can I just say, because you're not going to say this in your introduction to yourself, my favorite thing about Adriel that I learned is that he is a poetry slam champion. I wasn't supposed to say that?
It's okay.
Okay, you're on.
All right. Well, hello everybody. Now that I've been introduced as a poetry slam champion, you can hear my hoarse voice. I got to Hong Kong and just went crazy on fried stuff, and so my voice is not normally this raspy and sexy. So I don't want you to have any misconceptions. Well, thank you everybody for joining. If you're jet lagged like me, then this 9 a.m. arrival is an accomplishment for everybody. I'm really honored to be here and to be with these people. I kind of feel like I'm almost like an anti-expert. I joined the Smithsonian in June as the curator of digital and emerging media, and it's actually my first endeavor into the museum world professionally. I've always loved museums. Whenever I travel anywhere, museum is the first place that I would go, but I just never envisioned myself as somebody who worked at a museum. And over the course of the past 10 years, I was pretty much living as a full-time artist, as a freelancer, web developer, graphic designer, spoken word artist, musician, educator, kind of just like playing with everything. And when I got the job, I was living in Beijing at the time, and my friend was like, "Oh, you're a curator. I've always been a fan of things." And so that's like that's kind of a sense of like the people that I've been around, you know, like my people just did not know what it means to be a curator. Like my cousin's like, "So you're gonna like dust statues, right?" And so, but at the same time, with all the different things that I've done, I think a couple of things ties everything together that makes this position just really amazing for me, and I think the two main things is, one, everything that I do has been driven by my belief in imagination, and also everything that I've done pretty much has revolved around around the web. Everything is inspired by things I found online. One of my friends also, when he found out that I was a curator, he was like, "You're like a DJ for art and culture," and I think that's a really great definition of a curator. I kind of use that now because before I became a curator, I was kind of curating like on you know, Google Reader and stuff, right? And it would be like music blogs here, art blogs there, and so there really wasn't a line between the types of work that was transformational for me, right? And so yeah, we can kind of move on to the next slide. Oh yeah, actually go back to the, if we could, yeah. So if not, okay, perfect. All right, so earlier this year I was living in Beijing. I lived there from January to June, and this is a picture of one of my favorite places in Beijing. It's a store called Lost and Found, and so we can move through the next couple of slides. And so, yeah, perfect. Stop right there. Yeah. Okay, cool. So this is like actually not outside of it, but it's a good representation of what the outside of that store. Thank you. What the outside of that store looks like. So. And the reason why this was so transformational for me was because growing up, I was heavily involved in Asian American community politics. I studied Asian American studies in college. I was very much a part of the Asian American art scene, Asian American spoken word scene. And I was always really frustrated with the aesthetics of how Asian people were represented in America. And you know, I felt like every time I went to like an Asian American event, it had to like have the name of a fruit on it, right? It'd be like Mango Mike or something, right? And I just didn't really understand. I was like, well, you know, I know that there's kind of a sense, you know, in the West that like in Asia there's like time capsules, and you know, you see shots of like North Korea and stuff, and it looks like it's, you know, they still live in the 70s. And I was like, but they do have the internet, and so why does everything look like it did when I was 12? Like, why am I going to these events and they still have the exact same aesthetics? And I realized that it wasn't that there wasn't any shift in Asian culture. As soon as I started visiting Asia and eventually living there, it was that shift wasn't translating. It wasn't getting over to the West. And so really the time capsule was existing in the West, right? And I think that Lost and Found is a great representation of modernization that's unapologetic in its global influence, not specifically Western influence, not specifically Eastern, but very modern, just like the things that we see in the United States, the things that we see in Europe, right? But at the same time, it was just a very sophisticated and beautiful clash between, you know, going inside of a beautiful modern boutique and going outside and you're still in a hutong, right? And so I wanted to share some of the work that really inspired me. While in Beijing, I was studying pop culture and art, and that involved going to museums, but it also meant studying ads, sitting on the train and seeing how people were dressing, talking to folks my age. And what I learned was that I almost feel like we're, in the West, we're trying too hard to make things Asian because we're worried that if we don't show how Asian-y it is, then people won't know that it's an Asian thing, right? And so this, for example, is some of the work I'm going to show is from this website that I helped design, an arts agency in Shanghai called Edge. And you know, for example, you see this piece is influenced by Chinese culture, it's also influenced by graffiti, it's also influenced by Mexican culture, but it's very seamless in a way where these artists can still own it. This is Shu Hong, right? But it's by an artist who's also heavily inspired by Western comics, inspired by manga, inspired by hip hop and graffiti. And while I was in Beijing and while I was traveling around China, I just kept on coming across these amazing pieces of work that I just felt like I was not seeing in the United States. And so today, I think all of us are going to kind of play with this idea. We're going to really question, where is this loss in translation? Why does that barrier exist with the web where geography shouldn't really exist? And how do we shift museum culture in general, museum culture on the web, and also in physical spaces, so we can really develop that kind of cultural diplomacy that I think is really potent and that we have a lot of potential for, but that we haven't. I don't think we've quite unlocked yet. So, yeah, thank you.
Adria, if I may add to your point about representation of the Asia in United States, is that quite recently, my museum, the Peabody Essex Museum, conducted a front and end survey, basically interviewing 69 visitors, primarily American visitors, to our museum. And our findings, not very surprising, actually echo what you said, is that we found that we were primarily interested in learning about the visitors' perception of Chinese art in general and in relation to their general reception to China today. And we found a disconnect between Chinese art, which is conceived as peaceful and ancient, historic, and also we found that we need to actually do something in the gallery in planning for our reinstallation in 2019 to make Chinese art alive and also to bridge this gap between the past and the present.
Thank you. Okay, so the heart of our discussion, again, centers around this framework of the major moments in the history of the web, 15 years old, and for the most part, we are excited about the potential of the change that the way that the web has grown brings for museums. We thought we would just sort of focus on a few examples around each of these ideas and talk through them with you. So sort of starting with collections online, sort of the first moment that museums began to live on the web in a meaningful way, when they stopped. I'm going to skip right over this for a second, okay, Ilya? No, I'm using I'm good. You guys can keep that one, and I'll stay over here. We're going to come back to this. This is Ilya's ideas about museum collections and exhibitions online. But I'm just gonna frame this by saying that there was this. It was not very long ago that that websites were for us basically brochures, and leave aside the fact that they were ugly, they didn't do very much, right? So. Sorry that this is a meta example, but it's when I first encountered the web as a place where substantive and meaningful content could be developed. I see a couple of my colleagues in the room with whom I sat for many hours in sweaty rooms trying to work this sort of thing out. This was the Met's first collection gateway, and I think we were super proud of the fact that in the year 2000. We launched with 1,050 objects online, right? But it was also the moment where the flip switched, and we began to understand that we could talk to an audience that went beyond the one that we were accustomed to addressing, not just people who came to our site, but a global audience, an audience of folks who might never ever step in the doors of a museum. So this is a really important moment for museums. Oops. I think Daisy's up next because she has some examples to sort of add, and then we'll sort of kick it around a little.
Yeah, sure. I want to welcome you to the China House, which is called the Yin Tang in my museum. It's the only example, complete example of Chinese vernacular architecture, which is a building, it's a house from Anhui province in a very remote village. And it took us a few years. We started in 1997 and moved the house, and also we reconstruct the house and conserve the house. Now it's at the Peabody Essex Museum. And what we are doing, and what we have done, is we use actually very low technology. We just use very simple audio guide. There's no didactics, there's no labels, but also, if I may use the, thank you. As you can see, it's actually now incorporated into a modern museum building in the circle. But this is its original context. And we preserve not only the architecture, but also the contents, as well as the history or stories of the people, actually 8 generations of the family, Huang family, living in this house.
Not your family, though.
Close. And in 2003, when we actually opened this installation in the museum, we also had a web feature, basically provide contextual information to allow people to appreciate the architecture, the contents, and the stories behind it. But it's right now, I think that we are rethinking about this 2003 version. But if you ask me whether I would like to use iPad and other high-tech inside the building or the environment, I would say personally no. But also, I think I want to share with you what is also surprising for us in terms of kind of different visitors' experience of that is you would assume that the Chinese people would walk into this China house and they kind of understand everything, but that is not true because it's a very high contextual installation which really requires a lot of information about history, about geography, which people from China who lived in the city in their 20s may not understand this at all. So in a way that we're thinking about a web of difference, sometimes I think we can also think about a web of similarities. And also I want to share with you, in contrast to this very low-tech installation of a vernacular architecture, in 2010 and 11, the Free and Sackler Gallery in Washington, D.C. worked with the University of Chicago Smart Art Museum to organize an exhibition called Echoes of the Past, the Buddhist cave temples at Xiangtangshan, which features or which combines actually high technologies and 6th century Chinese Buddhist stone sculptures from, again, a very remote area in Hebei province. So this gives you a sense of the site. And unfortunately, in the early 20th century, a lot of stone sculptures have been removed, and many of them are now located in Japanese collection, American collection, European collection. And the curators and organizers of this exhibition actually use 3D scanning technology, which actually is the first time used to preserve and research cultural heritage site in the world. So the idea is very simple, is to use the scanning technology to scan scattered or dispersed sculpture and also scan the site in the hope that we can join digitally the lost sculpture and the site. So we have created a 3D model. And this is the installation view of the actual exhibition. And a central piece in the exhibition is a digital cave, which combined vintage photographs, 3D scanning data, as well as artistic license. And we actually commissioned contemporary video artist Jason Sullivan to create this digital cave inspired by one of the caves at the site. We also incorporate touchscreen technology in the gallery, as well as computer terminals which allow visitors to dig deeper into the context, both the cultural context and the physical and geographic context of the site. And also what is really interesting to me is we actually conducted a visitor evaluation, especially focusing on the visitor's experience of the technology in the gallery. And in general, we feel that this exhibition is successful in giving the visitors a deeper understanding and more moving experience of the site and sculptures. But also what is surprising to us is that we find that visitors with the age over 50 actually spend more time with technology, especially touchscreen digital caves, than younger visitors, which means that our stereotypical view of those young hipster user of technology is off mark. I'm gonna stop here.
Okay, so I was going to go back to, oops, sorry. I was going to go back to some notes that
Sure.
Ilya had put together
Yes.
about museum collections and exhibitions online, and sort of ask Ilya to lead off the discussion about really what this meant for cultural institutions, for the ways that we engaged with East and West, engaged East and West in thinking about collections and knowledge in the online space.
I think I would use local experiences to echo Susan and Daisy's instance about the in the very early moment, key moment, that there's a catalog, one union catalog for us in Taiwan. We try to build up websites, web resources, and databases, and we encourage researchers, we encourage institutions to submit their proposal in generating those digital assets. And then in the whole programs, we found a lot of things need to communicate with each other. So we spend human resources, especially precious professional hours, their very precious time to talk about how to communicate those things. But in that key moment, I think it's very pity that we spend time to resolve difficulties, but we don't think about build a better architect. We build we don't think about how to discuss with each other and design a new or better environment, ecology, to help the cultural data to be shared online. But that's a early stage we have.
Right. I think that's shifted quite a lot in the in the 10 years since TELDAP began its archives project.
Yes.
What else?
And after that, I think the people meet with each other is a very great kind of engine to help boost things up. Like in Culturmondo, we first gathered in Japan, World Expo 2005, and then we have 18 countries and about 23rd organizations to join us. And then we starting to talk about how do we found the physical human network to help each other and help each countries to evolve. So that's a very precious experiences for us to start. Yeah.
I've been at a lot of meetings in the last couple of months at which there seems to be a accord on this one matter, which is that technology in museums is not in and of itself the sort of great moment. It's the catalyst for bringing people, for bringing human beings together, for sort of joining ideas and minds. And I think that at the very simplest level, we thought of collections online as being something very, very straightforward. We were going to digitize, we were going to catalog, and we were going to publish. And I think that what we've discovered in the years that have followed is that act is not so simple, and that it really requires the sort of community of of colleagues working together to do it in a way that is effective and meaningful and that actually generates new knowledge. So, and Ilya is sort of the embodiment of this idea. He has been, in our community for a really long time. So if you have a chance to talk to him about his work, take a moment. What else? Shall we move on?
Yep.
Any questions? Okay. I have to go back through all of these. I'm sorry. Okay, so you get your collections online, and suddenly another thing shifts. And this was a hard one for museums. So I'll just say for a second that many museums, certainly several that I worked for, struggled with the idea that their content online could be enhanced by information elsewhere on the web. I mean, that seems like a super simple idea, but how many of you guys, remember back to 2002 and 2003 when, outward linking, non-authoritative resources, that was bad. That was really, really scary. And so we had to grapple with the question of how much our resources, how far our resources could stretch, and what the value of external content on the web was. And this was way before we even began to understand ourselves as nodes in a network, really just part of a great big electronic conversation that that I think we now quite well understand that we are part of. But just to sort of try to understand what that means. In 1998, I was part of the planning and execution of the contemporary Chinese art show Inside Out. I see my friend Teresa in the back there. We worked on that together. Does anybody remember this show? It came here to Hong Kong, among other places. It also was in Monterey, in San Francisco, where our co-organizers, SF MoMA, were. It went to Tacoma, I think. But it was the first major show of contemporary Chinese art in the United States, and really sort of exposed the avant-garde at a moment when China was still not entirely open to the idea of contemporary artists being part of the global conversation. I was talking to the curator of the show just the other day, and he reminded me that many of the works in the exhibition were at the time not permitted to leave China. So they were snuck out of the country in backpacks and in sort of, in sleeping bags. And when we were talking about this because, as it turned out, many of them could not be returned either because they hadn't legally left the country. But anyway, I bring it up because I think that the way that we did that show in sort of the dawn of the internet, actually before the internet, is very, very different from how you would do it now. I mean, I remember sort of very significant discussions about how you would explain works like this one, which is Sa Guochang's Borrowing Your Enemy's Arrows. And it's a story, it's a massive installation, very, very spectacular, but it's a story of a great military battle, I think a mythical one, actually, in China, that Chinese people, it was understood, would know about, but that, of course, none of our audience understood at all. People were wowed by this thing, but I remember reading an article in the San Francisco Examiner that said, I have no idea what this work is about. I mean, thanks a lot for that really, really long wall label that goes on and on and on, but I still don't understand. Bummer. We spent a lot of time actually putting together those really, really long didactic wall labels because our assumption was that we had to tell all of our viewers everything there was to know about politics, about history, about invention in China. It was crazy. And the publication was the same. We created a history of China. I mean, going back obviously to ancient China for the book because we felt that the works could not be understood. This is at a time, of course, when contemporary art is never contextualized. I mean, it was the tradition at the time to put the artist's name and the date of the work and the name of the work on the wall, and that was it. So this was kind of taboo, but we felt we had no choice, and some of these artists are now quite famous, but at the time relatively little known, and so their works were hard to understand. This is Xu Bing's book From the Sky. Daisy's been working with him on another work that we may talk about later, and this is sort of nonsense language in books that are laid out on the floor. But again, sort of the importance of Chinese calligraphy and the word, something that we really had to explain to American audiences. This work, which is absolutely spectacular and is here in the Hong Kong Art Museum. Does anybody know it? Guanda's United Nations. This one is Temple of Heaven, I think. So he collected hair from barber shops all around the world. It's super gross, and made this script that forms these panels. So it's sort of fake script in Arabic, in ancient Chinese, and in English, and it says nonsense stuff. But all of those panels are made up of hair mixed together from barber shops all around the country. Totally gross. But again, you had to explain that, and you then had to explain sort of what his purpose was in sort of mixing together all of these cultures and all of these languages and creating a United Nations. It's now considered a sort of seminal, very great work, but we were afraid that people would be afraid to go anywhere near it, or that the health department would shut us down. So I was thinking the other day about what it would have meant in those days for us to have had Wikipedia, which I think some of you know, came after 1998, and what it would have meant to have resources online that allowed people to go and look up the Cultural Revolution or Chinese calligraphy or gunpowder. But those resources didn't exist. And again, I think that there's a huge shift in the way that we practice because of our understanding that our audiences have access to other kinds of resources. So that's true online. That's true, when they read our books, and it's even true when they come to our exhibitions. Nancy and I were at the Cleveland Museum of Art the other day, and we looked up an artist on our phones, right? Is that right? Is that where it was? Yeah. And you see people doing that. And so again, our practice has shifted, and it's a really super interesting time. Go on. I'm going to head back to your slides. Sorry, I had Ilya's slides a little out of order.
I think the case of Inside Out shows a very interesting dilemma when the East met with the West. A lot of things need to be noted. Not of things need to be explained, or you would be just like my Chinese tweets on the hashtag MWA2013, and you all see that, but a lot of you just can't recognize it. So that kind of dilemma should be a way to put in the central of the cultural information sharing or the culture data sharing. So the linkable content might be a very good way to help us to overcome that kind of hustle. And the linkable thing shouldn't. I think when we now retrospectively to look back to the past experiences, the linkable is a value when people starting to meet with each other. And then when people want to refer to that kind of thing, when people try to transfer the knowledge from one place to another, then this kind of value become vivid and become very important. So the linkable help us to cross the border of our each organization, each limitation. So the Delicious and the Flickr group of Culturemondo help us to cross the border of first 18 countries and then to the 500 people around the globe of the cultural community of Culturemondo. And another example is that we are building a lot of databases and archives, but those things are kind of insular or kind of an island of itself, couldn't communicate to each other. And till later, a kind of hacker-based project called Moedic.tw. It's a dictionary project. It's founded by people who work in Google. And then one day he tried to teach his 3-year-old young daughter about learning Chinese. He found it's very, very, very painful to use the educational Ministry of Education online dictionary to teach her his young daughter. So he then jumped into the hackers community and asked all the hackers around to browse those dictionaries online and then cut into different pieces and reassemble.
Just so his daughter could learn English?
Yeah.
Oh,
And
okay.
then this dictionary make a huge impact because it's free, and then it's cross-platform, Android, iPhone, web, and then every word, everything on the web is linkable. Every word, so you see every word, you can click it, and then you just jump into and get the answer of it. And then people starting to generate animation calligraphy. So
Nice.
the writing is showing for the 3 years old daughter, as well as we people from outside to learn the Chinese, how to write it. So everything is assembled by spontaneous hackers, and they create the infrastructure, structural way to helping cultural information to link with each other. So it's I think it's a great example. And if I would think about any other projects, I'm thinking about MetaVid. It's I think it's a US-based project that's cut video, US Congress video into pieces and then to put it on Wiki, and to use a wiki way to help people to resemble and to spontaneously generate subtitles of all these congressmen talk. So it make a bottom-up and infrastructural way to help cultural information to freely connect with each other.
And I think that you know, the world of linked information goes beyond what we're talking about here. You know, content from the East connecting, you know, seamlessly with content from the West. I mean, I am encouraged by folks like AdLib joining our community and helping us to think about ways that that our knowledge crosses culture types, you know, so that the visual arts are not isolated from the musical arts, are not isolated from, you know, theater and other kinds of performing arts.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I learned that was similar in the music industry that I'm seeing in the museum industry is that with music, with the shift of the internet, we saw that it turned from a performance into an exchange, right? The audience is no longer content with just standing in the crowd and like watching somebody talking at them, right? And in the same way, I think museums have been really grappling with the idea of people not being content with just coming into a gallery and staring at a wall, right? And the internet allows us this vehicle to have this exchange. I think that it becomes complicated when we want to bring the idea of cultural diplomacy into it. But at the same time, it can be very simple if we kind of let go of kind of our preconceived notions of these barriers, right? So for example, when I was listening to Susan talking about Inside Out, one of the main barriers was like, each piece of work, each artist, it seems like they have to carry the burden of like this piece explaining Chinese culture as a whole to an American, right? And you know, like on top of that, you think about if this person isn't an art expert in the first place, that's like what, right? And so and you know, like when you look at a Picasso painting, you know, like, or when a curator brings a Picasso painting into a space, like, is that burden there? Like, is this piece supposed to also explain all of Spanish culture, right? Or, you know, and if not, then maybe that's why you don't need these long panels and long explanations and go online and search for what gunpowder is, right? And I think that right now we're kind of in this crucial moment because, as you saw from some of the pieces, right, like for example, the Monkey King that now is like so heavily influenced by like all these different cultures that you almost might not recognize it. We're going to start seeing a lot of convergence of styles, right? And at a certain point, sometimes those explanations and those cultures, you're going to start seeing artists really just shedding that, even if they are referring to traditional culture, right? Like it really is more about the display, and I think the reason is because a lot of Asian artists are influenced by Western artists, not only in their styles but also in their approach, right? When an artist doesn't have to carry the burden of explaining their entire culture, there's a certain amount of freedom, and I think that oftentimes Western spaces haven't allowed Eastern artists to shed that, and just, be abstract, right? And maybe it's not abstract in that, like, I don't understand these blobs, but it could be, it's abstract in that I don't understand this cultural reference. And I think sometimes if we allow ourselves to let go of that, like maybe even have faith in the audience coming in, seeing a reference, and then going home and looking up certain things that captured their curiosity, not only do we kind of have less work to do on our end, we also get an infinite amount of interpretations and an infinite amount of remixes in the ways that people would view this work, and the way that other artists will be inspired by this work.
Adriel just did a really seamless transition. He didn't even know he was doing it, I don't think, to the sort of next moment that we had identified in the history of web, particularly for museums, which I think everybody knows is Web 2.0. It was the moment of inviting visitor voices into the mixed, multiplying the viewpoints that we brought to our interpretation and to our learning. It is a critical moment, but exhilarating at the same time that it was confusing and upsetting and stressful. So I know that the group has lots to say about this, and Ilya, I think you've got a few prompts to start us off.
I mentioned Croatia because that's the first moment we discussed with culture community about culture about Web 2.0 in 2006. So at the Croatia quarantine, that's a heritage site that we held our roundtable meetings. We celebrate, and we also try to bring this kind of message to the Southeastern Europe culture portals and passionate people just getting around, and we talk about the possible ways to improve ourselves and to accelerate the exchange between these culture portals. And after that, a lot of things just move on. So we in Cuba to do a Mojito Manifesto to do the 2.0 to ourselves, to transform our community network into a real one to seamlessly help each other. But I want to emphasize the Brazil experiences and the Shanghai one. I think in Brazil the people, the culture community people, they initiate their own debates, and they form hacker spaces to spontaneous change things they create. Using recycled materials, using all different kinds of software components, and the debates supported by the Ministry of Culture of Brazil, they've become a kind of way to fund each other, and then all the content was generated in the media studio and webcast to the world. And that kind of atmosphere, when we participants discuss about it, it's just like 1990s Amsterdam and 2000 India. The passionate atmosphere just spread out in the Brazil Digital Cultural Festival. And then we do things in Shanghai when we joined 2012 Shanghai Biennial, and we found database and arts workshop to collaborate with Chinese artists and Chinese art students. And the community archive organization called ArtLink Arc. I would recommend you to pay a visit. ArtLink Art is a very, very great civil society project to archive the memory of all the Chinese artists, what they have or what they exhibit in where, the venue information, and a lot of things. And so I think the user contribution make those culture data most valuable because they use and reuse. And this kind of thing make it a memory and as a reference point. And then the things starting to move on after that.
Daisy, you've been kind of quiet.
Actually, I want to slightly change the perspective a little bit. I want to also share with you a little bit of what's going on in China and how the web has changing the museum community. I don't know whether that's okay.
Yeah, no.
Yeah,
absolutely.
sure. And I think
wait a minute, actually, let me introduce the next section before you do that. Because I think that user contribution and sort of the multiplying of voices of many languages is actually very, very closely linked to the last sort of piece that we wanted to talk about, which is multilingual and globalization and the sort of the way in which we are now engaged in a global conversation. And I think we're just at the beginning of this part of the evolution of the web. But I think we as a group had most to say, in fact, about this bit. So Daisy, take it away. Oh, sorry. I actually, can I talk about this? I don't know why the slide is here, but I just thought I would mention it because we've talked a lot about the presentation of Asian art in the West and a little less about the ways in which the East encounters Western art. But I was reminded recently in conversation with some friends about the great Cleveland Museum of Art touring exhibition. Cleveland, as many of you know, was closing its doors while it rebuilt some of its facilities and was trying to decide what to do with various parts of its collection that they felt should be seen, and made a couple of offers to China of its Chinese art collections, thinking that this great, very well known, very well loved collection would be much wanted in China, and the Chinese said, not a chance. Send us your impressionist art, and it was a really interesting moment for the Clevelanders who actually sent an important collection of impressionist and modern masters to Asia, to Seoul, Tokyo, and Beijing. They had 500,000 visitors, and I remember talking to the director at the time about the fact that this was a real opportunity for this museum to create a kind of canon for Chinese and Korean visitors who would understand the works that they had seen, as absolutely emblematic of impressionist art. And so it was a really interesting transition in their thinking about what they wanted to say about their collections. I don't know why that slide is there. Daisy?
yes. I can echo you to share it with you. If you're going to Beijing, make sure you are going to the National Museum of China in Beijing, which is now the world's largest museum in terms of gallery exhibition space. And they are launching an exhibition called Rubens, Van Dyck, and the Flemish School of Paintings, very long title, bear with me, masterpieces from the collection of the Prince of Liechtenstein.
Yep.
So it features 100 works, masterpieces. Some of them are very large. Most of them are very large. So I think actually it's really interesting to sort of think about. Susan's point is I think that there's a great deal of desire to be more and more international in their outlook, and I think that internet has. Also, the use of internet, or use of web technology, also sort of to many Chinese museum professionals, add a sense of being internationalized.
Well, I think that we're really seeing an interesting thing happening with the Chinese museums, which is that they no longer feel as if they need our interpretation of Western art in order to show it to their audiences. And I really like that, because I think that becomes an interesting conversation when Chinese curators are interpreting Western art and engaging in a conversation with us instead of waiting to be told what they should like, what they should love, what they should understand, and what should be confusing to them. So.
Yeah, and also in terms of how web is changing the Chinese museum community, I just read a blog or a comment from a visitor of the Nanjing Museum, which just opened in November as one of the largest museums in the world again. And the visitor was complaining, said, "Oh, it's really smelly when I walk into your new gallery." I said, so I thought, oh, this comment is weird. Why didn't they delete it? But actually, they did not. Actually, the person responded, said, "We are very, very sorry that we have to open very, very quickly, and we just painted the gallery, and we'll make improvement." But that gives you a sense of they're making effort and to be more transparent and to be more open, and also in terms of sort of the accessibility of their collection. And the National Museum of China is actually doing a 7-language version, online version. I don't know how effective is it, but I also don't know how did they do it. But if you also look at major kind of English language or American European-based museum website, you will find that their Chinese version is sort of the condensed version of their visitor's guide, and then some highlights from the collection translated directly from English to Chinese. So my dream is really use the collection, the Chinese collection in my museum, and also to sort of work with a Chinese partner. And then we'll design something on the web, particularly for the Chinese audience and in Chinese language.
Yeah, I mean, I want to shift a little bit, still off of this note, but I know we've been focusing a lot on the U.S. and China, and when we talk about East and West, there's hella much outside of that, right? But you know, I think the reason why these are two focal points is because they are in some ways indicative of how we see, you know, like Europe and and also like the rest of Asia and kind of these exchanges. I feel like when you look at the American media machine and British media machine, there's been a lot, right? There's been a lot out there, and so that when you go to any country in the world, you're gonna get The Office, right, or whatever, right? And it doesn't really happen the same way. And I guess if when we're talking about, for example, this Cold War era, right? Like if you look at that as like the art of war era, like now, when the Cold War ended, we started seeing the emergence of the internet in public consciousness, and now you're seeing kind of like the war of art, right? And it's when I draw those comparisons between the two eras. For example, when I was in Shanghai, I went to the Propaganda Museum, which is a really dope museum. It's a small, it's a guy's place, right? He's got these posters up, and whenever during that time, whenever they were portraying America and the West as a whole, they would literally have Uncle Sam, right? And kind of now, we're in 2013, and that Uncle Sam figure, kind of the antithesis of it is like this kind of mythological, folkloric interpretation of Mao, right? But because of these Western media machines, we've been able to kind of shed that idea of the U.S. and the West being just encapsulated by this dude wearing a top hat in red, white, and blue, right? But at the same time, I still feel like there's this great obsession with Mao-era China when China is interpreted, right? And when we look at other instances of in Asia, right? Recently with the Philippines, we're looking at just this third world country in ruins, right? Despite the fact that they have mega malls in there, right? And despite the fact that they were once an American colony, right? And so I think that's where this exchange and conversation needs to happen, because it's nobody's fault, right? It requires for China, for example, for the Philippines to maybe put a bit more out there that's outside of the scope that we saw during the Cold War era, and also for the West to demand of that, and in order for us to demand that, we need to really acknowledge the fact that there is more that exists, right? When I was in Beijing, you know, like you might be surprised to learn that people aren't thinking about freedom of speech all the time, right? They're not thinking about communism all the time, just like we're not thinking about hot dogs all the time. Most of us, right? And so, like I guess what I would really like to see is, you know, a kind of shift in the ways that we approach what we ask for. When I say we, I'm sorry, I mean like American institutions, Western institutions, what we ask for, right? And I know, for example, at the Smithsonian, there's a relationship with the Chinese consulate, and it's, you know, the way that this conversation is happening, nothing's going to change because on the Smithsonian end, it's like all folks really know what to ask for is what they've already seen before. And then on the China end, all they really know to offer is what they think that the US wants, right? And then so in the end, you're just gonna get hella lion dances, right? And so, you know, in order for us to
We have
shift-
that picture.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Okay, cool, yeah. So yeah, we can talk about this.
No, we can't.
Okay.
Yeah, wait. We can talk about it after. I'm getting a time signal from Nancy. So actually, we have more to say, and we are here for the next 3 days, and want to talk to you all after this session. But you know, Adriel has ended on a lovely high note. Uncle Sam, hot dogs, Chairman Mao, and censorship. Let's see, and the Philippines in ruin. So I think that is the perfect spot for us to end. And to actually say to you that, you know, thank you for coming, thank you for listening. We are so looking forward to the conversation that we're going to have with you, you know, today, tomorrow, and on Thursday. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you to all of our panelists for innovating the concept of the opening keynote.